Good morning, all. It's Thursday morning. It's about 9:15. I told you I was going to come here and do this morning, and that it was not required that you be here. Probably should have sent out an email reminding people that I was going to do this, because I know Tuesdays are a pretty full day. I'm still trying to get a hang of all the various details that we're doing on online learning. What I want to do today, and I don't know how long this will take, probably not the whole hour, but I'm going to go through a problem-based learning case. I'm going to be using the ethics acronym that's contained in both of the ethics PowerPoints. And I'm going to be using that to look at a specific case, a specific scenario that is described in week 4, and I'll go through that in just a moment. But let me just remind you very quickly, if you go to the PowerPoint that I've created, the two PowerPoints actually I've created for this course. One is dated 2017, one is the field ethics for 2020. They both have this slide, and it talks about ethical decision-making process, and it offers up an acronym. And I've mentioned this in class briefly before, but it's E of ethics is examine relevant details. Is the dilemma, question, concern, problem of a personal or professional nature? And it encourages you to think about, is this a personal or professional challenge when you're coming up to something that you think may be an ethical question. So E, examine relevant details. T, think about relevant laws, policies, regulations, and I'm talking state law, federal law, agency policy and procedures, routines like that. So think about all of the details that may be related to this. That's ETH, ethics. ETH, hypothesize. Hi, Tika, welcome aboard. I'm going over the guidelines that we've talked about for the problem-based learning assignment. So hypothesize, imagine possible consequences of your behavior. So E, examine. T, think. H, hypothesize. I, identify vulnerabilities. Who is helped by your action? Who is harmed by your action? And Tika, this is an acronym that is contained in the PowerPoint presentations that are posted in the course Canvas site. So examine, think, hypothesize, identify vulnerabilities, and then C, consult with supervisors, colleagues, or mentors. Those are just real important pieces to help you kind of strategize how you are going to do an assessment of a difficult or challenging scenario. So there's that. Let's go on and look at the scenario that is posted in week 4 of Canvas. So I'm going to share screen. Okay. You might recognize this. This is unit or week 4. This is the overview of everything that's for this assignment. And by the way, I have gone through and I've made sure that the drop boxes are properly configured, so you should not have a problem getting these submitted. So I'm going to go down here. There's a number of readings. I've intentionally chosen a series of these because I think they're interesting and they raise complicated questions and challenges. Conflicting confidentiality. I'm going to just play with this before I get into the case. These are just examples of situations that other people have described or that I've experienced that I think would give cause to raise questions. So I'm going to encourage you to take a look at these on your own, and I just really hope I didn't mess this up. I maybe did. Okay, so I'm just going to go quickly to the scenario. Sorry about that. Technology. I am finally figuring out how to use the touchscreen on my computer very well. 492. I'm going to go to modules. I'm going to come up here to week 4 because that's where we are at. So there's just a series of essays in there I would encourage you to read and think about. They do tend to have somewhat of a similar theme per each week. So let me talk about ethics case number 2. I just want to forget about it. Maybe. Gotta pull it up down here. Okay, I would encourage you to use this for your problem-based learning exercise 2. What would you do? How would you handle this situation? So let me just read it out loud with you. I can maybe make it a little bit bigger. I have no idea what I just did. Okay. So the scenario we're talking about is I just want to forget about it. That's the title I've given this. Let me just go over this detail. And as we go over this, as you think about this, consider that acronym: examine, think, hypothesize, identify, and consult. Let's see if we can come up with, and I will want to read what you come up with as solutions through this entire event. So put yourself in the role of the social worker. Valerie is a social worker at an alternative school for youth who have had problems in mainstream classrooms. One of the teachers has referred a 14-year-old girl, Rose, who has had more difficulty concentrating during class lately. The teacher describes her as feeling a little bit depressed and has been getting thinner, has been losing weight over the course of the semester. Valerie, the social worker, has been seeing Rose, but the conversations have been very surface level, very basic. She has talked with Rose's mother by phone, and she has noticed that Rose has seemed more sad lately. She said that Rose, the mother has said that Rose has seemed more sad lately. She says that Rose is trying to lose weight, but that's the way girls are today. They always want to be thin as a pencil. By the way, when we're talking to people, when we're talking to parents, we will hear things people say, and we may see things differently, but it's valuable to understand the perspective of both the participant we're talking to, and it's valuable to understand the perspective of people they're involved with. Again, if you go back to the basis of our code of ethics, is we value the importance of human relationships, and valuing and recognizing the importance of human relationships. It's valuable to understand Rose's relationship with her mother. Okay, so today, Rose has told Valerie, or in this case, Rose has told you, that she's been upset ever since something happened that she hasn't been able to talk to anyone about. Rose tells you that she is dating a 17-year-old boy from Hempfield High, who lives in her neighborhood. Rose, by the way, at 14, is in 9th grade in middle school, but she's dating a 17-year-old, not terribly unusual. She tells you that they are driving around in his car and they end up parking. And this was a consensual process. She was okay with this. She thought they were just going to talk and maybe kiss a little. But the boy got very demanding and ended up having sex with her. She tells you that she didn't want to have sex with him, but that he was stronger, and that he was stronger than she was, and that she could not stop him from doing what he wanted to do. After that, he took her home, and she hasn't talked to him since. She sees him in the neighborhood occasionally, in part because her parents are friends with his parents, and so they run into each other. She's not worried that he'll try anything again. She tells you that he seems to be avoiding her, and maybe she suggests maybe he's embarrassed about what he did. She hopes that he is embarrassed. In fact, this is the first time that she has had sexual intercourse. As Valerie tries to learn more about how Rose has been dealing with the aftermath of this assault, Rose becomes very quiet and says, there's nothing I can do about it now. My mother has tried to tell me about how boys are, and I didn't listen. I trusted him. Valerie, the social worker, talks with Rose about options of talking to her mom, about possibly going to police, about seeing her doctor, or getting help at the Blackburn Center, which is a rape crisis center in the community. And Rose says she just wants to forget about it and not talk about it anymore. And with that, she pretty much stops talking about it. Valerie isn't able to get her continue, and Rose finally gets up and returns to class. After Rose leaves, Valerie, the social worker, is torn between honoring Rose's wish to not disclose the sexual assault and continuing to encourage her to tell someone and to seek help for what she thinks may be post-traumatic stress. So that's the basis of what we have. This is the information that we have on this scenario. Tika, I'll pick on you since you're here. Do you have any particular thoughts on this right off the top?
And you're asking what I would do if I was the social worker?
Yeah.
I think the social worker is doing a great job of encouraging her to go to the crisis center. So just say this happened in Kansas City, then I would encourage Moxa.
And just I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm going to put you on the spot for a second, Tika. Some of the folks here may not know what Moxa is. Do you know more about it?
Oh.
Just briefly?
Yes,
just by name.
It's Metropolitan Organization of Kansas City Sexual Assault. Okay. So it is a service that helps victims of sexual abuse, sexual assault.
Okay, good. Thank you. So,
Um,
sorry.
and no, it's okay. And with her being a minor, unfortunately, it has to be reported. I know that this girl is telling the social worker not to tell anyone and she wants to forget about it, but she has to report because a minor just told her. But I wasn't sure. I mean, am I wrong? Because he is 17, but there is abuse occurring, so it's still abuse. So that's
Okay.
something to kind of take into consideration,
Okay.
depending on the situation. So I would report it. Try to talk to parents. It depends on how safe she feels. If not, at least report it because I mean, at Synergy, my practicum was at Synergy Services with the youth. I would at least tell somebody because I was just a student, but there's cases where they would have to report it. Now, with their parents knowing or not, it depends because some of the youth were homeless. But
Sure. Sure.
so, but reporting that would be a step on my part of being a social worker, and just continuing. If she doesn't want to talk about it, don't push the student to talk about it, but just mention to her that you're there for her, or try to get her to talk to you throughout the school year. Just don't give up on the student is what I would do. Just
Okay.
continue trying to talk to her, even if she refused, because she went through a lot of trauma.
Sure. Sure. Okay. This is helpful, Tika. Thank you. I really appreciate you being here and letting me put you on the spot with this. Um,
Oh, you're welcome.
I'm
It's
going to go
just,
ahead and
I guess that's the whole mandatory reporting that we talked about on Tuesday.
yeah,
That's part
mandated
of it.
reporting.
Like
Mandated
there's still
reporting.
abuse.
Yeah, mandated reporting is a difficult issue. Um, so I'm going to kind of explore some things with this. And what I'm going to do, since I'm trying to encourage you to think about, I'm trying to encourage all of you to think about this in a structured way. Um, I'm going to raise some questions um, and maybe these questions might help you um, as you think about how you would handle this and how you would write up your response. So I'm going to go back to the acronym that I was suggesting. Um, and I'm going to start at the
And
very top.
Mr. Bachman,
Go ahead, Tika.
a lot of times when we report something for the youth, like in a situation like this, the state itself will reach out to the parents. That's on
Sure,
us if
sure.
we reach out to the parents, but if we don't, just knowing, I'm pretty sure it is one of the state policies to reach out to the parents or try. So that's something to consider as well.
I think that's a really good comment. And you have two classmates this semester who are actually working in Child Protective Services. And I'll be interested to hear what feedback they have. Um, frankly, I don't think there's a reasonable mechanism by which the state can um, investigate a sexual assault against a minor without actually involving the parents to some degree. So I think parents are going to be involved in this. Um, I'm just sitting here, and I'm going to get to this point later on, but I'm sitting here right at the start, um, wondering. Rose is telling me that she just wants to forget about it, and I'm suddenly realizing that I probably do have a legal mandate as a licensed social worker. I have a legal mandate in all 50 states um, to report this to Child Protective Services. Um, how do we handle that burden, that responsibility? Hi, Renee, welcome aboard. Um, we're talking about um, the case scenario that I'm recommending people use for the next problem-based learning assignment. This is listed in week 4. It's titled, I Just Want to Forget About It. And it involves an incident where a school social worker is told by a student that she has been um, uh, she doesn't use the word raped, but says that her older boyfriend had forced her to have sex. She had never had sex before. And so we're kind of talking about that right now. So,
Right.
so
Professor Bachman, I haven't made it to that point with Children's Division yet. I've been
uh-huh,
just basically doing a lot of follow up to
sure.
parental issues. But I know that for a case where a child has had some traumatizing events, what they have had, what they've tried to do is to try to make sure that all parties who would be present or who would likely need to ask that child questions are present just the one time so that they don't re-traumatize the child by continuously having that person repeat what happened if it was a scenario where they had to, say for instance, prosecute or whatever.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the process I think that you're describing, Renee, um, is um, where that interviewing takes place is in what's referred to as a child advocacy center. Um, the Kansas City metropolitan area, depending on where the child lives and where the sexual assault took place, and of course, where the report is being made. Um, the Kansas City area has several different child advocacy centers. Um, the center that works for Southern Kansas City in Johnson County is known as Sunflower House. Um, Up north of the river, Platte and Clay County use the Child Advocacy Center that's located over at Synergy Services. Um, it's located on the Youth Resiliency Center campus in North Kansas City. And then there's also a Child Advocacy Center that serves primarily Jackson County, Missouri. So we have 3 different centers. So yeah, that's a really good piece of advice, Renee. What I'm going to do with this assignment, I'm using the acronym that we talked about briefly in class that's contained in the PowerPoint presentation where it talks about ethics is the acronym and how we might go through this. So we're still fairly early in this process. But again, in this story, the student has disclosed this to the social worker at school, said she doesn't want to talk about it anymore, doesn't want to talk to anybody else about it, and basically leaves and goes back to class. And the challenge is, what is the social worker there in the school going to do about this? And I'm just going to go through the ethics acronym, and I'm going to start off by examining relevant details of this situation. So let me see what I can garner out of this. And by the way, the truth of the matter is this scenario doesn't present all of the details relevant to this situation. And in reality, in our practice as social workers, when people share situations with us, they often don't share with us all of the details. We have to go with what we have. And so in this scenario, I'm asking you to go with what you have in this scenario. So examine relevant details. We know that Rose is 14. She tells you she's dating a boy who is 17, lives in her neighborhood. She consented to park with him, it sounds like. She infers that she thought they were going to talk and maybe kiss a little. That sounds like, to that point, consent. She says, and this is her words, the boy got very demanding and ended up having sex with her. She says she didn't want to, but he was stronger and that than she was, and he couldn't stop her. So it implies force, non-consensual force. Here's going to be, and I'm going to sound really kind of silly when I ask this question or raise this point. She says that they ended up having sex. He ended up having sex with her. One of the things that we might want to consider is we don't know exactly what that means. He ended up having sex with her. I'll be very candid with you. I had parents bring their daughter to the clinic to be examined, by the way, against her will, to be physically examined because she had, and this is what they said, and this is what she said, she had slept with her boyfriend. We all wink and nod, and we think we know what sleeping with the boyfriend means. But in fact, as it turned out, as we interviewed this young lady, that is what they had done. They had slept together. I don't know. I've probably slept with a couple dozen people at the same time in a movie theater with a crowd during a boring movie. Okay? Yeah, thank you for smiling and smirking at that, Renee. You get the point. She and her boyfriend slept together. They hadn't had sex. Okay? And just to be clear, I didn't have sex with a dozen people in a crowded movie theater. I just to be clear. So we don't have all of the facts. He ended up having sex with her. We probably want to have some really clear understanding of exactly what happened. We don't need all the nitty-gritty details, but I will share briefly here just another example. I had been called to the emergency room to have oversight and to work with the victim of a rape. I was called by a doctor in the emergency room. I was told that they had a rape victim in the emergency room, that she was upset. They'd already put her into a room. They had already called one of the sexual assault nurse examiners to come in to conduct the evidence collection kit. But my role was to come in and be supportive of the patient, to help kind of coordinate things until the sexual assault nurse examiner could arrive, because she was actually coming from home. And then I would also coordinate the collection of evidence and the transfer of evidence to law enforcement. I would coordinate police if they needed to be involved. And again, my primary objective was to be supportive and kind of a traffic, I was going to say traffic cop, but that's a poor metaphor. I was to kind of direct things in the situation. So I arrived in the emergency room and I went back to the room where the patient was by herself, and discovered a young woman who was pretty upset, who actually was in the process of hyperventilating, pretty distressed about what was going on. And I'll be honest with you, the very first thought that went through my mind was I in the right room even? But I recognized she was hyperventilating, and kind of by protocol, I knew what I could do and what was appropriate in the circumstances. I excused myself from the room for a moment. I mentioned to the nurse that the patient in the room was hyperventilating and that I was going to give her a paper bag to breathe in. The nurse was like, "Thank you, I appreciate you doing that." The nurse even said that she should have done it because she had realized that the young woman was having a hard time. I went back in, gave her the paper bag, so she could kind of breathe into that, and that without burdening you with all the medical details, it can actually help in a situation like this. It's a proven medical procedure, minimally invasive medical procedure. And I just introduced myself, talked calmly to the young woman, used some basic neurolinguistic programming techniques to just kind of match her behavior and to really kind of connect with her. And she began to calm down. And I said to her that the nurse or the doctor who had called me and told me that she was back here in the room, had asked me to come and help because they understood that she had been raped. And at the moment I used the word rape, the young woman started to panic again and became very, very agitated, and was like adamantly telling me, no, 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 I wasn't raped, and was almost angry in her agitation that she had not been raped. And again, I'm suddenly thinking of my very initial walking into the room thinking I might have been in the wrong room. But just to be clear, I took a moment to say, okay, maybe I'm using the wrong word. I was told rape, but I was told that you had been attacked, that you'd been sexually attacked. And she goes, yeah, I was, he made me suck on him, but I wasn't raped. I wasn't raped. And as I talked to this young woman, I came to realize very quickly that rape for her had the meaning of losing her virginity. It was a totally different thing from having oral sex. It was still unwanted. It was still upsetting. It was still traumatic. But she was still an intact virgin. I mean, to use that language, that was an important issue for her. So we need to be really clear when people use vague statements like having sex or sleeping with. We need to be clear of that detail. So this is examining relevant details. I will just share with you in the case scenario I was describing with from the emergency room. I did not, as I don't, I did not stay in the room during the evidence collection where they were using the sexual assault evidence collection kit. That's an extraordinarily invasive procedure. I left the room and was not there. I mean, it was the doctor, actually it was the doctor, the sexual assault nurse educator, and the patient were the only ones in the room. I actually, when I left the room, I left the emergency room and came back in about 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes, having asked the doctors and the nurse to call me when they were done with the exam. They had not called me, but I came back to the emergency room and I walked into the staffing area, and the sexual assault nurse educator and the physician were both on the phone with a supervisor, and they were both, and this bothers me, they were both very angry and agitated because they were saying over the phone that this woman had not been raped. She's denying that she was raped. And had refused to have the exam because she hadn't been raped. And I took a moment and I got the attention of the doctor and nurse and kind of explained the conversation I had had with her. And both the doctor and the nurse were kind of embarrassed and apologetic and refocused and went back, made peace with the patient, and talked with her about the sexual assault that she had experienced. They collected evidence of the sexual assault. They had evidence. They had several different manifestations of evidence. And then, as is pretty typical in a case like that, they prescribed and offered prophylactic treatment for sexually transmitted disease. And at that point, the patient became upset again and said that she didn't need that, and was just very, very upset that the doctors were saying that she might have contracted a venereal disease And this only further convinced the physicians to think that this patient had made this all up, that they were lying to her, in spite of there having been what they thought was evidence that they collected. And so again, the physician and the nurse are both angry at the patient. And I went back into the room, found the patient sitting in the room alone, hyperventilating, gave her a paper bag again, worked to calm her down, and started asking questions. And the bottom line is, this young lady had no idea. She had no idea that she could have contracted a sexually transmitted disease through oral sex. She just didn't know. And the physician and the nurse very easily jumped to the conclusion that she must be lying because everybody would know this. I mean, who's this, quoting the physician and the nurse, actually quoting the physician, who's that stupid? So the social worker is explaining this to the patient, and the patient is like, oh my God, yes, I want the medicine, I want the medicine. And so I had to go back out and get the doctor and nurse come back in to do this. Facts are important. So the first thing in this, using the acronym, is to examine relevant details. And again, without prying too deeply, what does she mean by ended up having sex with her, that he ended up having sex with her? It clearly sounds like it was rape, but we don't know. So there's that issue. So I'm going to leave that one at that point. Think about the relevant details, or examine relevant details. Think about relevant laws, policies, regulation, and code. Tika was on here a minute ago. I think Tika had to leave, but Tika had raised.
I'm here.
Oh, okay. Hi, Tika.
Sorry, I didn't realize my video was on, but it was just laying in the bed, but I was right next to it.
Okay, well,
apparently
I have my screen set up so that I'm only seeing one person at a time. So let me. Oh my goodness. Janae is here.
Hi.
Good, okay. There's three of you here. Sorry, Janae, I don't know how long you've been there. Just kind of been rambling on, thinking it was just Renee and Tika and me. So Tika had earlier commented, and by the way, this is recorded, so I'll be posting this entire presentation. Tika had mentioned the issue of, as a social worker, we are a mandated reporter, and the fact that this young lady is 14 years old and appears to have been sexually assaulted, that there is the relevant law that, and that is of mandated reporting. We are obliged as a social worker, we are obliged as a student, you are obliged as a social work student, excuse me, in both Kansas and Missouri, if you have suspicion of a sexual assault of a minor, you are obliged by state law, obligated. There are consequences if you fail to follow this law. You are obliged to make a protective services report. So you need to think about relevant laws, but you also need to think about relevant agency policy. This incident is actually taking place in a school, and I will share an experience I've had with one of the school districts that we have worked with students at Park University. So it's a public school district here in the Kansas City area. We had a situation arise where a social work student had, a student in the school had disclosed to the social work student that they had been sexually assaulted, and the student felt that as a mandated reporter, actually the student understood as a mandated reporter that they needed to make a report to Child Protective Services. And when the social work student took this to her field instructor, the field instructor said, not so fast. Not so fast. We need to kind of look at this first. And the student brought this issue to class, brought it to me as the field liaison, and this is an appropriate use of the field liaison. The student brought it to me really angry and upset and feeling like she was being prohibited from doing what she was legally obligated to. She felt that the field instructor, the social worker at the school, was obstructing her legal mandate. And the social work student was pretty upset about this. And understandably, and I'll be honest with you, I appreciated how upset she was about this. I encouraged her to go back and ask some specific questions of her field instructor relevant to this situation. And as it turned out, as sometimes happens, the field instructor and student had only talked briefly about this incident. And in fact, the school social worker, the field instructor, was very intent on the fact that a protective services report did need to be done, and the report needed to be done from the social work, from the field instructor's perspective. She wanted the student to make the protective services report, but she wanted to follow the school district's policies and procedures. And the policy and procedure is you don't just pick up the phone and call and make a report. The policy and procedure is that within the school district, they have a form that they fill out that documents all the material so that it's been shared between the student and the field instructor and other people that need to know the information. And oh, by the way, the policy in the school district was intended to, in part, to protect the people that work at the front desk in the school, because they have had the experience of the school making a protective services report. And even though that is handled confidentially, when the parents get called by Child Protective Services and they are told, what the allegations are, sometimes it's easy for the parents to realize, oh, this is coming from the school. The school is the problem here. And then the parent drives to the school and walks in the front door and starts screaming and yelling, perhaps even being violent. And part of the policy at the school was they wanted the people at the front desk to know that a protective services report, they didn't need more detail than that, but they wanted the people at the front desk to know that there had been a protective services report filed regarding a particular family, so that the people at the front desk would have an opportunity of maybe just a couple seconds to be prepared if a particular parent comes in angry and upset. That's policy. The problem was the field instructor, because things were rushed and crowded at the time, and maybe it was the end of the day, the field instructor determined that this wasn't something that had to be reported right now, at 3:30 on Monday afternoon, that we could report it first thing on Tuesday morning, because nothing's going to happen right now in the particular case. But there had been a poor communication between the field instructor and student. Field instructor didn't realize if there had been poor communication, but there had been clearly a misunderstanding. So we examine the relevant details, what really happened. We think about relevant laws, policies, regulations. We hypothesize the consequences of our reporting. Remember, if you go back to the basic premise of our code of ethics, we talk about the importance of human relationships. We talk about the importance of integrity. I have a personal bias, and that is I do not make protective services reports, either child reports or adult reports, without explaining to the principals that I'm aware of why I am making a report. And I think it would be very valuable. The consequences are, the consequence of just calling Child Protective Services and saying, Rose was raped by a 17-year-old, you need to do something about it, and just letting Child Protective Services show up at the door and say, "Hello, Mrs. Smith. I'm from Child Protective Services. I understand that Rose was raped and I need to talk to Rose." Okay, I'm racing through that. Renee, you're working in a Child Protective Services agency. How extraordinarily awkward and uncomfortable is that situation? And how unfair is that to the parent? How unfair is that to Rose, who is the person we're working with? And frankly, how unfair is that to the Child Protective Services worker that has to do the investigation?
It's definitely a worker, because you're placed in a role where you could be attacked first off, because that's
Oh
not
yeah,
something that a parent wants to hear. Um, I mean, I couldn't even make it to that point. When you say that Rose consented, I had to first look up like what age consent was, because Rose needed to even understand that at years old she cannot legally do anything. It's 17. That is the age of consent in Missouri. So I had to first figure out, as you were speaking, I had to go look and see what consent was, and then that would help steer that conversation for Rose and Rose's family, because while Rose may have been in a relationship with a guy a little bit older, legally she could not have consented to anything with him.
right.
So
Good point. Thank you. Damn, I just got called out by one of my students. But that's really perfect. I mean, that's true. And my point in talking about the consent was she was okay with going parking. Oh, there's nothing that was illegal about that aspect of it. But you're absolutely right. And legally, she could not consent. Now I'm going to step away from this scenario for just a moment and throw in a complicating factor. Yes, in Missouri, and I think in Kansas too, the age of consent, the age of legal consent is 16. Okay, so legally she could not have consented. Ooh, here's a potential challenge. In the United States of America, in all 50 states, a 14-year-old girl, or for that matter, a 14-year-old boy, may request confidential reproductive health care from a medical provider. So under state law, they can't legally consent to having sex, but under federal law, and federal law supersedes state law, under federal law, they can go and get contraception even without parental consent, and they can get it confidentially. We had a situation play out in Kansas that I was directly involved in, where I had the Attorney General of the state of Kansas. Actually, there was the Deputy Attorney General that specifically I had my interaction with, but he was operating under the orders of the Attorney General of the state. I was specifically told face to face by a Deputy Attorney General of the state of Kansas that they were going to go after my license and have my license revoked, and thus revoke my ability to practice as a social worker in the state of Kansas if they discovered that I had knowledge of a 14 or 15-year-old having sex, period, and I didn't report it. And the scenario was basically, if a 14 or 15-year-old comes to the family medicine clinic where I worked and they're requesting reproductive health, and the resident doctors think they might want to have the social worker involved, and I come in and I get involved, and the 14 or 15-year-old admits that she is having sex consensually. I know legally she's below the age of consent, But she is saying she's having sex and she wants to be on birth control and she wants to be safe from sexually transmitted diseases. The state's attorney general determined that the doctors, the nurses, the social worker, that we would have to make a protective services report, even though by federal law, this woman could come in. And in trying to work out a solution to this particular problem, the deputy attorney general of the state of Kansas said to me, well, the problem is they can come in and they can ask about birth control and they can receive birth control. But if they tell you they're having sex, you need to make a protective services report. Basically, the attorney general's office had made a decision about medical practice, that the physician could not actually ask certain questions without moving into that mandate. So you got three people here. I'm curious, Renee, you kind of rolled your eyes for a moment. What do you think of that issue? And by the way, this really happened to me. I mean, the guy sat there and shook his finger in my face and said, we will go after your license.
I'm pretty shocked because it would seem that you would be reporting all day long. I mean, honestly. Seriously, like depending on which clinic what type of clinic that it was, like if this was a teen clinic, you could very well be reporting all day long. Like that's equivalent to them putting condoms in the counselor's office at a school or at the public health center where teens are allowed to go. Sticky situation.
It is. It really is. And actually, this guy wasn't just shaking his finger in my face. Standing right next to me was my very good friend, Dr. Margaret Smith, who at that time was the medical director of the health department in Wyandotte County. Wonderful lady, wonderful lady. And he was shaking his finger at both of us that he would go after her medical license. Our response was to contact the American Medical Association, the National Association of Social Workers, and eventually the American Civil Liberties Union. And we threatened to take legal action against the Attorney General and asked, short of going to court, we asked the Supreme Court of the state of Kansas to weigh in on this without going to court, if they could make an opinion. The Supreme Court of the state of Kansas accepted this argument. They looked at it, they discussed it, and they came back with a statement that the Attorney General's office had overstepped its regulatory authority in saying, in threatening us, but they had also overstepped their regulatory authority in telling professionals how they could practice their professions. That we were obligated under federal law to be able to provide these type of services, and it was standard of care that in providing such medical care that we would incidentally receive information that could be handled confidentially. That's how it finally settled out. But it was very, very interesting. And I was relieved by the way it was settled, because I was actually dealing with a situation where two 15-year-olds together had come to the clinic with cash because they didn't want to use their parents' insurance. They didn't want their parents to find out. These two 15-year-olds had had sex several times. They wanted to continue having sex. They were in a monogamous relationship. They were really committed to each other, and they wanted to do things right. And so boyfriend and girlfriend sitting there in the doctor's office having this discussion, admitting that they were having sex. And I was like, oh, hell. Yeah. if the Attorney General of the state prevails on this situation, I'm going to have to do both of these as protective services cases. So bottom line is we need to know the rules and policies and regulations. Hypothesizing, so examine, think about laws, hypothesize consequences. What happens if I just do decide to go ahead and make a protective services report without telling Rose or without involving her parents? What are the consequences? Rose may never come back and talk to me again. We don't know how Rose would react if we did this without informing her of this thing. I personally think we really have to talk to Rose about it. And I honestly think we need to talk to Rose about talking to her parents about it, because eventually, even though it's embarrassing and she doesn't want her parents to know about this, and maybe she's afraid she'll get in trouble, I think it's going to be important for us to probably talk to Rose's parents, but only with Rose's permission, and I would think actually with Rose's presence.
I like that idea, because you don't know what type of parents Rose has. Like, her parents could be the type of parents who may become abusive to her due to her
Right.
supposedly consenting or having behaviors that they don't agree with. So you don't know what type of discipline that she would receive at home. You don't know what type of parents she might have at home. It may not even be her real father or her real mother, or it opens the door to a lot of other issues that Rose may have. So I agree with that.
And what you're saying, Renee, is perfect. I mean, it's opening the doors, and that's what hypothesizing is all about. Imagining what are the possible consequences of our behavior. What are the consequences of our legal responsibility?
I also agree 100% that we need to talk to Rose about what will happen and tell them that usually we make a report. This is what will happen. Your parents will get informed by somebody. And how about we do it with you, or we can do a family meeting?
Right.
Because I know a teenager that her mom found out that her daughter was sexually assaulted because of DCF, and she was devastated. That mother was. And the reaction, she handled it completely fine. Like, she was good for the daughter, but that was lucky. Like that, but her mom's reaction was very upsetting. So it's good to have like maybe a family support, so you guys are in this together. Because just tell Rose, I would hate for your mom to find out from someone other than you or I, or someone more personal to her.
It is so important to be able to
hypothesize.
It is so important, Tika, to be able to hypothesize how this is going to play out. I mean, it's easy for me to imagine, my parents would be totally understanding and they would be, supportive and loving. But that's not the way it works with everybody. Some families, dad finds out that his daughter's been raped by this neighbor. Dad's going to get a gun and go after the kid's parents or go after the kids. We don't know how these things play out. And I think being able to communicate, to hypothesize and anticipate consequences of behavior is really important.
It's also, I'm going to say, when I do this scenario, I'm going to mention knowing culturally what's acceptable is so important, because when I had an 18-year-old at Synergy tell me she was sexually assaulted when she was 6. Well, she was 18, so I didn't make a report, but what I found out is when she told her parents, she was Muslim, and her dad was like, wow, now I can't marry you. And her mom completely didn't talk to her for like 2 years.
Yeah.
And it's just good to know culturally what we might expect to be able to handle this the right way.
And to be clear, Tika, her father, it wasn't so much the father said, I can't marry you. It's, I can't marry you off. I can't get you married to somebody else.
Yeah, marry you off. Oh, yeah, please. You know what? Please, thank you for correcting me. Marry
What the
you
hell
off.
kind of culture is that?
bad for that girl. That's why I was crying in class when Jessica was announcing
I actually
all that
remember
stuff at
that
mock.
situation. Yeah.
That was like, I was so sad for her.
Well,
anyways.
but that's really what it's all about. And again, I'm talking about some things about how we would take this particular scenario apart. As you write up your response, you may have some different perspectives of any of these and all of these. So examine, think, hypothesize, identify vulnerabilities. Well, Tika, you've just identified a significant vulnerability. How is father going to respond? How is mother going to respond? How is this going to happen when protective services or the police show up and start talking to the 17-year-old and his parents? How is that going to play out? What are the various vulnerabilities? And by the way, I want to be clear, I'm not suggesting how do we look at these vulnerabilities, and that we should use these vulnerabilities that we identify as a reason not to report. We're identifying the vulnerabilities that are based upon reporting so we can anticipate and plan how we are going to respond to vulnerabilities. Identifying vulnerabilities isn't to keep us from practicing legally. It is to help us respond better. So identify vulnerabilities. And then the final piece here is consulting with supervisors, colleagues, and mentors. Rose is doing this, she's employed as a school social worker. I would hope that she consults with the teacher in the classroom, specifically with what she has found. But can she do that in a way that is respectful and confirming of the confidential relationship that Rose has with Valerie, the social worker? If Valerie takes that information to the school teacher, to the classroom teacher, is that a violation of confidentiality? I'll let you guys work on that one and figure that out. Who can Valerie or who can you as a social worker reasonably confide in to get more information or to provide a strong supportive network for Rose? We want to do what's best for Rose, but Rose may perceive some of the things we do as violating that relationship between Valerie, and that could compromise Rose's ability later on to go to Valerie, or to feel that she could go to Valerie later on for help. So identify the vulnerabilities, but also consult. And how do we do these things? See, some aspects of this acronym, ethics, examine, think, hypothesize, identify, consult, sometimes the various components may be counterproductive or contrary to one another. Rose may be an extraordinarily private individual that doesn't want anybody to know about this under any circumstance. How can you fairly get this information and consult with other people? The truth of the matter is,
So
all of you. Go ahead. Let me finish this, and then you go, Janae.
Okay.
The truth of the matter is, all of you have an obligation to share this information with your field instructor, okay? You are working as an agent of your field instructor. And I would encourage all of you not to think that you have a measure of confidentiality that exists only between you and the participant. You are functioning as an extension of your field instructor. So I just wanted to get that out. Janae, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm at work, but so yeah. So like at my practicum, we have a SST team. And so like at the school, we
And
have
what does that
the
mean,
therapist.
Janae?
It's the student success team. And it's just to so it consists of our principal, the therapist, a counselor, and us, like the resiliency people.
Uh-huh.
And we have to share all of our like information, like we talk to each other. So I mean, is that like ethically wrong, if that makes sense? I don't know.
What do you think?
Well, see, uh, I mean, yes and no, because like I feel like it's essential because we all work with the children and like we all help out and things like that. And so it's like it wouldn't be fair if the kid told me something and then one of the other people went in there and then they're going in blind.
Mhm.
Oh, I am so sorry. I guess we are about to open. But it's like, but then we'd just be like going in blind.
Right.
I don't know.
Well, here would be my logic, and I'm going to just pitch this to all of you. How do you make it ethical? And my suspicion is, and I know that your store's getting ready to open here. How do you make it ethical? Oh, that concept of informed consent. You know, when you sit down with a kid, say, you know, Rose, I'm part of this team with Synergy, and we talk regularly. We work together. So when you're talking to me, you're talking to everybody. And then spell out who that is you're talking to, and the limits, explaining the limits of confidentiality and privacy. I think if you get that information out, not only are you covering the ethical obligation, but you're actually opening a door for Rose to talk with those other people. Because if you and Rose connect really well, but she knows that you're also talking with Valerie, Rose might be more inclined to talk to Valerie and get support there as well. Because, as a student, you're only there 2 days a week. You know, who's Rose going to talk to when you're not there? So think about these issues. How do you make them more ethical? And part of that would
I do
be
have
that
a
communication.
question about this topic.
Okay.
Because
And
I
by the
don't
way,
know if you're.
go ahead, Tika. You're breaking up.
Oh, I don't know if you remember. I don't know if you remember, but I had an 18-year-old at Synergy when she told me all that stuff. She was just a walk-in. She wasn't like a Synergy staff youth that was staying at the shelter, because she's just like someone that can hang out on the YRC. So I didn't think I had to tell my field instructor, because it was just personal information that she wasn't there for. She was just
Sure.
there for extra support. And it happened in a different country. It happened when she was 6. Like, is that the exception, or was I wrong? Should I tell Abby that? Or, like, I didn't think I had to tell her because of her being 18 and just a walk-in.
Well,
But, like, I get what you're saying. Like, we needed. I get what she's saying about how we need to tell the support team. But, like, if that was a Synergy youth staying in the shelter, yes, I get that. But I don't know. We can talk about that later. That's a personal thing.
Well, here's the thing that I would encourage you to do, Tika. I think it's a real important piece. I would encourage you to think about that in your paper.
Yeah, I might write about that, because it was during our last supervision meeting
Right.
that she goes, you should have told me. And then she found out it was 18, and then she's like, oh, okay. So she even like kind of stepped back and realized, no, I didn't really have to. But now I'm thinking, because it was a Synergy person, maybe I should have, just in case. But I think I did a great job, because I gave that person resources, and she actually seen the resources.
Yeah. This is my bias. And I hate absolutes, but this is my bias. I think you should have mentioned it to Abby. I think anything that happens in the context of that agency, that you have any question, that you have any doubt about, anything that happens in that agency, you have an obligation to share that with the field instructor.
Yeah, at the time, I felt pretty confident on
Sure.
what I was doing, but now I look back and think, maybe I should have, because maybe there's other resources I don't know about
Yeah.
that they could have helped her.
Good for you.
But-
Good for you.
But I mean, that's what a student, that's what us being students are about. So it's just a learning experience
Yep,
for next
yep.
time.
So with that, I've gone through the scenario. We've used the ethics acronym. We've gone a little bit longer than I'd planned on going. I'm going to go ahead and Renee, unless you have any final comments, I'm going to go ahead.
I have a question and a comment.
Okay. And then after that, I will cut this off and post it so people can get to it.
That was the question.
Okay.
So
Oh my God, he can read my mind.
Yeah, I'm a good mind reader. And as far as how we would handle it, we have family support team meetings over at children's division, and so they do share. I don't know how the teacher would play a role into that, but as far as, I mean, like the informed consent is just that. So starting off with the child being aware of, hey, when you tell me this, just to let you know, I do have to share it, and this is my responsibility. And then, ultimately the family support team, they're going to maintain their level of confidentiality amongst the team, but it has to be discussed. So that's just all I have.
Renee, thank you. That was helpful. I think that's helpful. We often forget these little details when we're doing this stuff because it becomes so natural to us. But Renee, Tika, Janae, I know you're already gone. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for contributing. This wasn't required, but boy, I appreciate it. It was a lot more fun having you guys here. So I'm going to hang up. And Renee, by the way, I'm realizing an email that I'd sent out to everybody bounced back about tips for the FLEP. If you go on, and this is what was in my email, if you go to the Canvas site for this class, or I'm sorry, for field, and you look under files, there's a file in there that's called tools. And in that file, it actually has some examples posted. I think there's 2 different files in there that are posted, or 2 different folders that are posted in there that give examples of how you might fill out your FLEP.
Okay.
So those examples are there under tools, under files in field seminar.
Okay, that helps.
Okay, we'll see you all. Thank you again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.